On December 22nd, 2032, an asteroid that is about as wide as a football field, that's about double the size of the asteroid that created the Barrington crater in Arizona, is going to be hurtling past Earth. Now, depending on which estimate that you listen to, the chances of it actually striking Earth are somewhere between 2% and 6%. Now, there's already a chorus of people online who have started singing in unison 8 years early that it's irrational to have concern over this event that's happening because it's so unlikely to happen. Only 1 in 17 chance that it'll actually occur. Are people like that right? Is it unjustified to have any concern over this? Or are they being irrationally optimistic? In this video, we're going to talk all about this event. What the days, weeks, and months are going to look like heading up to it. What type of information should you be looking for? How much can we trust what the government and official sources are suggesting about this event? And if it were to occur, what would this event look like? How bad would it actually be? What would be the ramifications of it? We're going to talk about all of that in this video. Hey everybody, this is Praxis. In this video, I wanted to talk about the newly discovered asteroid 2024 YR4. Now, I say it's newly discovered because it was only first seen by scientists, allegedly, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it was only first seen by scientists towards the end of 2024. And that is not at all unusual. At the moment, it is just flinging past our planet right now on its way to do another orbital loop. And it's quite the norm for asteroids to be discovered like right when they're on their way towards us, within like a week or a day of them swinging by the Earth or potentially hitting it. And oftentimes scientists will only see it like on its way out. Like we won't have even seen it coming in. We'll just see it after it kind of is flinging away from us. So this is pretty normal. This particular asteroid has an orbital period of about 4 years, just a little bit under 4 years. The orbit of this asteroid is also pretty much in line with the orbital ecliptic plane of the entire solar system, which means that it's interacting with the orbits of planets more frequently. And that is what has some people particularly concerned with this asteroid, is the fact that it's interacting with the orbital space of the Earth. Now, not everybody is concerned about this. At the time of this recording, the estimates on how likely this is to actually hit Earth are somewhere between 2% and 6%. So that's somewhere between a 1 in 50 chance and a 1 in 17 chance. And I've already seen like the chorus of people online pop up just to say it's ridiculous to be concerned about this. It's like, even at the higher end, it's like 1 in 17 chance. You're really worried about that. Well, I don't know. If I had a kid, and I do, and I was going to send them to daycare, and I knew, I don't know how I would know this, but if I knew for sure that there were 17 kids at daycare and one of them was going to get kidnapped that day, there are people out there that would seeming to tell us right now that like it's ridiculous to be concerned about that. It's 1 in 17 chance. Your kid's probably coming home at the end of the day. Don't worry about it. Send your kid to daycare for the day. Then there's people like me that think, maybe it would be a good idea not to send my kid to daycare if they have a 1 in 17 chance of something horrible happening to them. So different people have kind of different perspectives on their tolerance for risk, I suppose. But for people like myself, 1 in 17 sounds like something maybe you want to keep your eyes on. Now, in terms of what would happen if this were to strike the Earth, that depends really on its size. I mean, there are asteroids that are slamming into the Earth all the time, and there's a bunch of little pebble-sized ones coming in right now. It really is important what the size of the asteroid is in terms of whether you really need to be concerned about it. And that is what has people concerned about this particular asteroid. Now, we don't know exactly how big it is, at least that's the official word. They're estimating it's somewhere between 40 meters in diameter and 100 meters in diameter. If it's of the 40 meter in diameter size, that's going to put it in the ballpark of the size of asteroids that were thought to have created the Barrington crater in Arizona. That's a pretty big crater, and that's if it's on the smaller side. If it's on the bigger side, the results of an impact with Earth, they would probably be kind of on par with the largest nuclear explosion humans have ever created, the Tsar Bomba. It'd be enormous. It would likely vaporize at the point of impact instantly, between like 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers out of rock, just instantly getting vaporized. There'd be a massive fireball that would go out for several kilometers. There would be firestorms, there would be earthquakes. If it hits anywhere near water, there could be tsunamis that could be up to 100 to 200 meters tall. It would be a really big event, but only regionally. Something of this size is going to affect a region primarily, and that's the end of it. And because of that, and because of the fact that we have so much lead time on this, we're talking about something that's 8 years in the future. This asteroid is just flinging by us. Now it's going to go out and do another orbit, and 4 years from now it's going to come by, and it's not predicted to have any chance of hitting us on its next time down. It's not until its second orbit around where it may be meeting us. So we've got plenty of time to do things, at the very least, which could be evacuating an area that is likely to have a potential impact. Now, the potential impacts at the moment are being laid out across the top northern edge of South America, going across the Atlantic Ocean, going out straight through the center of Africa, and then up towards India. The areas that would have the highest chance of having a direct, straight down kind of impact, which would be the most energetic, would be northern Brazil. That area would be the most likely to get it impacting in that way. Now, leading up to this event, I think it would be really, really interesting. It's not just an event for December 22nd, 2032. This is an event that would unfold for a good 6 months prior. And what I mean by that is that as the year progresses ahead of that, like around midsummer, like June or so, the southern hemisphere is going to be in winter, and they're going to be facing out towards the outer solar system at night, and they're going to see this object on its return trip. It's going to be coming towards us through the summer into the autumn of 2032. We'll be seeing it come closer and closer and closer, and then it's going to set below the horizon, go into the daytime side of the sky, and the next time that we have any interaction with it is when it hits us. I don't know that for certain that we're going to be completely blind to it. Maybe as it gets a little bit closer, we'll be able to start seeing it again as it gets a little bit bigger. But it's going to be an interesting series of months and weeks. So it's a really dramatic event. It's a really interesting event. And I think that at this point, all we can do is kind of just wait and try to collect as much data as we can on it to try to find out what the orbit is actually going to be. We're going to get a lot more data over the next 4 years or so as we watch a full orbit of this, and then continuing on, we're going to get better and better data as we get closer. Okay, so that's what's going to happen in about 8 years from now, and the question for all of us now, including yourself, is, well, what do we do about it? And what I would suggest is what we need to do about it right now is to just absorb as much information as we can, because the information is going to get better and better as we get closer and closer to the event, and more observations are taken of the orbital movements of this particular object. So where do you get your information from? Well, in this video, what I want to talk about is 3 different sources that I think are worth considering. One is official government sources, the other is the scientific community itself, and the third is the rumor mill. And all 3 of these have kind of pros and cons associated with them. Let's start with official government sources. Now, there are a lot of people out there that will tell you that the government always lies about everything. And I think that's not accurate to say that. What the government does is that the government just isn't always married to telling the truth. If the government has a choice between telling the truth that might panic people and telling something that's a heck of a lot more comforting to people but doesn't happen to necessarily be true, they tend to choose the option that is not going to panic people, and they tend to tell people what they think is going to make people, not go into a crazy frenzy. Already, the propaganda storm has been kicking up around this 8 years early, and people are already saying, you're crazy if you think a 1 in 17 chance are odds that you don't particularly like. So there's a lot of force already very early on with this, suggesting that this is something that people don't want people panicking about. I mentioned that the orbital period of this is about 4 years. What's interesting about that is that if you rewind about 4 years, the last time that this thing kind of swung by us, it would seem that we missed it. then. But if you rewind another half of its orbit, like when it was first on its way kind of headed towards us, that would have been about 2018. And in 2018, there was an interesting a story about the astronomical world. And that was that over in the western United States, I forget which state it was in, there was a solar observatory. And at this solar observatory, there was a janitor. And on this janitor's laptop computer, apparently, there was some pornography on it. And the government found out that this janitor working at the solar observatory had some pornography on his computer. So the government's response to this janitor having some porn on their computer was that they mounted a massive raid of this solar astronomical observatory complex. They locked the whole place down. Black Hawk helicopters were flying in. And not only did they lock down the observatory, but the entire town around it was completely locked down. People were detained, people were questioned, people were spoken to, and we don't know what the content of those discussions were. The post office was shut down, so messages couldn't go in or out. And this was because there was a janitor working at a laboratory in the town that had some porn on their computer. Simultaneously around the rest of the world, and this is more gets into the rumor mill kind of stuff, a lot of other solar observatories seemed like maybe similar-ish things were happening where they were kind of going dark, people were losing contact with them. Again, that gets into the rumor mill territory, but just the idea that the government would close down an entire town because an employee at a, this is an official story, by the way, at least it was, unless they've changed it again, that an employee at a scientific lab had some pornography on a laptop. To me, it seems a little far-fetched, maybe. I'm not sure. I can't fault the government for that. A panic in itself is a danger, and it's a good thing to try to avoid. As to whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing for the government to constantly be telling people the things that aren't true in order to try to avoid panic, I'm not going to weigh in on that. But it's a difficult situation that they are in, and I can understand that. The evidence that this is the case, just goes back throughout history, just in recent history with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. If you recall, right up until the moment that it happened, both the Ukrainian government and the American government were saying you were kind of like, out of your mind crazy if you thought that that was going to happen. There's no reason for anybody to relocate out of the country. That's just completely nuts. As it turns out later, they knew full well that it was, right on the cusp of happening. You look at COVID here in the United States, and, it's time after time, whenever the government had an opportunity to either tell the truth that might panic people or tell something that was a little bit more comforting that didn't happen to be true, they always tried to avoid the panic. First it was, don't worry, it'll never come to our shores. Then once it came to our shores, it was, don't worry, it's not airborne. And then once it was clear that it was airborne and people bought up all those respirators and then there were no respirators left, they said, don't worry, you don't actually need a respirator. You can just put any random piece of cloth over your face and you're going to be fine. Then later on, getting into the vaccines, they promised that they would have vaccines created, even though scientists had tried and tried many times over to make vaccines for the common cold before, and it always failed. They promised that they were definitely going to be able to do it when they created something. Their words, not mine. They promised that if you get that jab, their words, you will not get COVID. Time and time again, they told the comforting lie versus panicking people, and with telling them what was potentially true. So this is just a habit that governments tend to have, and I think we just need to kind of accept that. But that said, that doesn't mean that all the information coming out from the government is completely useless to us. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, going back to COVID, and this is the reason that I brought COVID up, is that during that time period, there were a lot of scientific studies that were coming out. And the summary and the conclusion of those scientific studies was always in line with whatever was that comforting, I hate using the word lie, but comforting story that the government was telling people. But if you actually looked into the data of these research papers, if you actually looked at the study itself, you would oftentimes, frequently, actually more often than not, get a very different view. If you have any kind of rational thinking ability, you would come to the conclusion that, the data in this study, the way that it was conducted, doesn't actually support the conclusion of this study that is kind of been attached to it. It seemed like conclusions and summaries were just kind of being rubber stamped onto studies. But the nice thing about this is that the data itself seemed relatively untouched. And I think that probably comes down to the idea that, the government is realistic about the idea that they can't control everything in the world, especially with the scientific community. There are just too many players involved, and they are. It would be impossible to really keep all of this stuff from coming out. But what they tend to do is just kind of like steer the conversation, kind of like stamp conclusions onto things, stamp summaries onto things. That's as deep as most journalists tend to go when it comes to a scientific study. They'll just kind of read the summary and then report on that without actually looking at the data. And for most people, it's the same thing. Nobody has time or the inclination or the interest to really look at the actual data. But what I found, again, during COVID is that the data itself was pretty pure. So that's an encouraging sign that as we are going forward, even if the government, behind closed doors is under the impression that this thing is definitely going to hit and it is going to be, an event that is going to have consequences. And even if they are not sharing that with people, a lot of the data coming out of the scientific community, I have a fair degree of confidence is going to be able to communicate that, even if the summaries and the conclusions on some of those research papers have been kind of tweaked by governments to try to calm people down. So that's kind of encouraging in and of itself, if you don't mind sifting through some heavy reading. The next thing I wanted to talk about is getting information directly from the scientific community. We're already kind of talking about that a little bit. And the one caution I would have about that is that, there's kind of a mindset going around in a lot of online circles, and it relates to, climate change and everything going on around that people will say that, mainstream scientists have been making predictions for years that are just incredibly dire, but in reality, things have never been as bad as the scientists have suggested. And that's inaccurate. Over the past 10 to 20 years or so, I've been following kind of the mainstream consensus view of climate science. And the reality is not that the scientists have been exaggerating things and making them worse, and the reality is not as bad. The reality is actually the exact opposite, where the consensus view of things has always been a kind of toned down, kind of rose-colored version of what ultimately ended up happening. Reality has consistently outpaced and moved faster and been worse than what the consensus predictions have been, revolving around climate change. I know it's comforting to a lot of people to think that, if a scientist is saying something that you don't really want to hear, you can kind of be like, but scientists, they always kind of exaggerate things. It's totally the exact opposite. I mean, scientists are human beings like the rest of us, and when scientists get confronted with ideas that are kind of too awful for them to even want to believe themselves, they can kind of convince themselves that, I can't imagine, they do the same thing you and I that I just illustrated there. It's like, the data seems like it's suggesting things are going to be really bad, but the data is always kind of exaggerating things. Scientists have that same tendency. So if you're looking directly, to the prescriptions that scientists are kind of drawing from a lot of the data, I would bear that in mind, that scientists, like all the rest of us, oftentimes don't want to believe that things are as dire as they are. And if you see things kind of like where scientists are kind of waffling, where it's, it could kind of go both ways, but I think we're going to be fine. Keep that in mind, that scientists have that tendency not to exaggerate things and make things worse than they are, but actually the opposite. That said, you can always find scientists out on the fringes of any kind of situation, and that's where a lot of conservative media gets its stories from. They'll find some crazy scientists that said 20 years ago that within 5 months the Earth was going to turn into Venus, and they'll debunk that one scientist and be like, that scientist and all the scientists they're all kind of loony. That's what people on either sides of scientific debates are always tending to do, where they'll find the lunatic fringe and then debunk the lunatic fringe and then suggest that the entire thing itself is made out of nothingness. So that's important to keep in mind. Scientists are going to probably tend to be a little bit more optimistic about things than the data merits. So keep that in mind going forward. The third place to keep your eyes on, like I said, is the rumor mill. And where the rumor mill, I think, comes into play. And again, the downside with the rumor mill is a lot of times a rumor doesn't turn out to be true. But it is a place where information sometimes will bubble up that you're unlikely to get in other locations. And the rumor mill, I would look to for the types of trends that would be indicative of people in power, people with capabilities, acting in one way even though they're talking in another. If the United States government is telling people, don't worry about it, we don't think this thing's actually going to hit, but in all the areas along the potential strike zone, they are pulling military assets out, relocating people, kind of divesting from areas. The same thing for wealthy individuals. If there is movement of money out of areas, like who wants to own land that's about to get completely vaporized? If you see people in power, people that might have the ability to get access to information that you and I don't get, if you see them acting in a way as though they think that this is maybe going to be more of a thing than a lot of people are publicly letting on, that would be another thing to kind of factor in. And you kind of get that information from the rumor mill. But beyond that, I think the best thing that we can do is just keep paying attention to this story. At this point, we really don't know. I mean, it is a game of probability. I think it's interesting. I mean, it's a really dramatic event. If it does play out, and if people are prepared for it, you could... this could be an event where there are 0 human casualties. We've got tons of lead time. You never have 0 human casualties because there's always like the people that no matter what people say, they don't believe it's going to happen. They don't think outer space is real or whatever. So there'd be the people that would be like the hardcore people. That's like, I'm gonna stick it out, and my enthusiasm will protect me from there's always going to be people like that. But there's not a requirement that anybody needs to be killed by this. So this could be purely a exciting scientific event. Even if it's just a close flyby, it's going to be interesting. So pay attention to it. Don't be frightened by it. Don't be worried by it. It's kind of like you're standing in a road and there's a Mack truck coming down the road. There's no reason to get terrified of it. If the Mack truck is coming down the road and you think it's in your lane, all you do, you just step out of its way, let it go by, and then you go about your day. Prepping isn't about worrying. It's not about being terrified. It's about being aware of your surroundings and reacting appropriately to them so that it doesn't ruin your day. That's it. I hope you found this video helpful, and thanks for watching. Hey YouTube preppers, if you enjoyed this video, here's another that I think you might like. But before you click on it, I wanted to take a moment to thank all the people you see on the right-hand side of your screen. They help to support all the work that I do here over at patreon.com. If you'd like to join them and get your name added to the list, the link's below.